Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan features two radio professionals with over 100 years of broadcasting experience between them. Dave Hogan and Randy Houston are both native Western North Carolinians whose rich voices have been heard in every glade, cove, and holler of Western North Carolina and East Tennessee, primarily on AM radio. And between the two of them, they've worked in just about every radio format. As you can imagine, these guys have tons of stories about the day-to-day of live radio and the interactions they've had with listeners and entertainers while they were immersed in, at the time, one of the most influential and informative mediums available. Those experiences will be featured in this podcast series. Check the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts with Randy and Dave on Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan.
Welcome to Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan. We're so glad to have you back. Randy Houston and Dave Hogan.
And a big Hogan howdy to you.
So good to have you here, Dave, and be talking. I'll be honest with you, we're doing a podcast, and a lot of you folks are kind of liking what we're doing, and several of you putting this into your download repertoire, and every 2 weeks, every Sunday, we release a new show talking about our history and our lifetime of broadcasting experience.
But the good thing about a podcast is, even though it's downloaded or uploaded, whichever term you use, on Sunday, it stays there. You don't have to listen to it on Sunday. You can listen to it whenever you want to.
Exactly. And as opposed to radio. But I when I sit behind this mic and I talk with you and stuff, I am taken back to our radio days. And we used to make a joke about, hey, they've run out of anybody to talk to over at that radio station. They're interviewing each other. And it's kind of what we do here on Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan.
Yeah, I'm reminded you talking about radio and music, and a lot of the AM stations, when FM became the music source for so many people, a lot of the AM radio stations became talk stations.
Right.
A lot of syndicated talk programs like Rush Limbaugh and Mike Gallagher and many others. But I heard a story about a local station in Miami that wanted to, and this has been played out or was played out all over the country in a lot of cases when the radio stations started switching on the AM dial from music to talk.
Right.
In so many cases. And there was a lot of opposition to that from the DJ because he wanted to play the records. I was one of them.
I was too.
I finally gave in, though, in about the last 8 years, I guess, of my broadcasting career. I did a talk show, co-hosted a talk show in Johnson City on WJCW. But there was a story about this DJ in Miami. I think I heard Larry King tell this story. Larry was on the radio in Miami for years.
Yeah, before he joined the Mutual Broadcasting Network. I think. Yeah.
And then, of course, before TV, his long-running Larry King TV show. But the manager of this radio station told the morning disc jockey that they were going to a talk format, and they were going to stop playing music. And this DJ didn't want to do that. He wanted to continue to play his music, and this battle went on between the DJ and management for a long time. They're trying to get the DJ to stop playing music and do talk radio, take phone calls from listeners and that sort of thing. And so he went in one Monday morning, and they'd taken all the turntables out of the radio station.
We'll fix him.
Yeah, we'll fix him. So he had to sign on, and he had to do talk radio.
That takes me back. You started on the air in what year?
1957.
Okay. I didn't go on the air until 1970. So you 13 years ahead of me. But I heard the stories around some of the radio stations that that I've worked at about back in the old days of wire tape recorders. There was not the invention of the tape yet, and the images, the vocal images, would be stored on a piece of wire that ran across the tape heads on the machine. And what an invention that was at the time, because that gave DJs a break. In the old days, you went in and you sat down and turned the mic on, and that was it. I mean, you were stuck there. You got to keep talking and keep talking and keep talking for hours. Actually, I'd like to go to the bathroom, boss. Well, you just wait. The wire tape recorder that came along, and the old acetate recording LPs, those gave you a break too.
I never did play. I never did work with a wire recorder. I remember seeing a wire recorder, but I never did work with one.
Yeah.
The song that gave me the bathroom break, and a lot of other disc jockeys, was Marty Robbins and El Paso.
Oh, yes.
Jukebox operators hated that song.
It's almost 5 minutes long, 4:30, I think.
And that's the length of 2 or maybe even 3. Regular,
yeah.
Normal records run 2 minutes or something like that. And so, of course, the jukebox operators, they wanted as many songs played as possible. And when Marty came out with El Paso, it was unheard of for a record to last that long. Marty was a great guy. I met Marty on 2 different occasions, and I think I spoke earlier on one of her podcasts about lessons you learn in life. You never know what's going on in somebody's life. You never know when they're telling you something that you think might be untrue, turns out to be true. That story I told you about Caroline McElveen and Minnie Pearl. Well, when I was booking the country shindigs at the Old City Auditorium, I booked Marty Robbins on a show.
I think I saw that show.
You may have. Marty, and we would try to book a show in Spartanburg, Greenville, or I remember booking one in Shelby and one in Hickory. So instead of just having the artist appear at one venue, we would have them appear at 2 and get a little better price break on the cost of the show.
Gotcha.
So for several times I booked shows in Greenville or Spartanburg, and then the next day in Asheville. Say on Friday night in Greenville, Saturday night in Asheville. And I would invite the artists who were on the show on Friday night to visit me at the radio station on Saturday, the next day before the Asheville show, to promote it. And I remember I had Marty on a show, and it seems to me it was the Wilburn Brothers and Loretta Lynn were also on the show.
I'm pretty sure I saw that show.
And Marty, I invited them to come by the radio station. I don't think Loretta did. The Wilburn Brothers did, though. Doyle and Teddy, they came by WSKY, and we sat and talked the Saturday, talking about the show that night. But Marty didn't come. And at the show that night, Marty was very standoffish. He just wouldn't communicate. And I misjudged the situation badly, and I still feel bad about it today. As I said, he was kind of standoffish, as we'd say back home in Hogan Holler. Well, I badmouthed Marty to some of my friends. I said he was one of my heroes, and the fellow won't even talk to you. Well, time went on. Maybe 2 years later, Keith Fowler, whose son later on was the manager for the band Alabama. Keith was a promoter, and he was a big-time promoter, whereas I would promote 1 or 2 shows. Keith would promote 25 all across the country.
Big shows.
There was no way that a little fella like me could compete with him price-wise on getting the talent. So I fell in with Keith. Instead of me promoting the show, I emceed the show and did the local advertising buys. So I stayed in the business, but just not as the promoter. And the good side of that is I didn't put up the big risk of losing money. So I'd get my little pay for emceeing it and for doing publicity. And Marty was booked on a show a couple of years after I met him. And I dreaded it, because I remembered how he had snubbed me and several other people at the previous show. So I was dreading meeting Marty Robbins again. But, I was the MC of the show, and I had to go up and introduce myself, and his son Ronnie was with him on this show. And I introduced myself, and I said, I'm the master of ceremonies, and you probably don't remember, but we met a couple of years ago when you were here. Oh, yes, I remember. I'll never forget that night. That wasn't long before I had my heart attack. And he said, I was in such pain that night.
Oh, my. Oh, my.
You could have knocked me over.
Yeah.
With just, like they say, a feather. How bad I felt. Because here I had badmouthed a man who was having a heart attack.
Well, you and I both, and I patterned a lot of my radio and broadcast and public appearance career, kind of thinking of Dave. I'd gone to so many of those country shindig shows and saw you emceeing the shows, and we talked about this before on the podcast. Then I came along in the 80s and was pretty much the house MC for anything that happened in the Asheville Civic Center during the decade of the 80s. Everything from Ice Capades and Sesame Street to big concerts with Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton and people like that. And you're right. You go backstage and meet and talk, and some of those people are having a bad day, I guess.
Yeah, that was a lesson I learned. You never make a quick judgment on somebody. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what's on their mind. You don't know what kind of day they're having. So from that point on, I gave everybody, and still do, the benefit of the doubt.
Same here. And I've got a similar story that involved your stepson, Aaron Lawson, and I. Both were big fans of Sammy Kershaw. And I was emceeing a show at the Civic Center that had Sammy Kershaw on it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Aaron's ever told you this story or not, but Aaron is an officer with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department, and he was at that time also in uniform. I said, come on, Aaron, I want to introduce you to Sammy Kershaw. And we went back to behind the Civic Center. It was out on the mezzanine outside there, and Sammy and a couple of guys were sitting around, and it didn't go well. Just leave it at that. It did not go well. And Aaron and I have never talked about this since, but immediately Aaron, and this was going back to the 80s, remember, in the days before law enforcement talk evolved to diffusing the situation. Your stepson was way ahead of his time. He diffused the situation. He really jumped in and diffused everything, and it got calm, and we walked away, and everything's fine. But Sammy Kershaw must have been in a lot of pain that day, too, because he was not very nice.
Well, I've never met Sammy Kershaw, and I must say that there are a few, very few, the vast majority of people I met, not only in country music, but show business of any kind, are wonderful people. Wonderful people. But occasionally, you'll meet somebody who's not.
Yep. Yep, and you're right. The large percentile in the 90s, wonderful people that I still have got relationships with. In the day we were at our radio station that I was working at the time, 570 WWNC, it was a billboard reporting station. There were only 150 of those stations around the country who reported the songs that we were playing to Billboard magazine, and their Hot 100 countdown list every week was comprised or composed of the figures that were reported in by these radio stations. And you can imagine those radio stations were very important to record companies in that day. We used to get it used to be set up on a Tuesday that Randy would take music calls. The phones would ring off the hook from music promoters in Nashville, Tennessee, promoting a country music song. Like, hey, Sammy Kershaw's got a new single. We want ads next week. And the phones would light up from all of the major and independent record labels on that day to be talking to that music director, trying to get their songs added. Sometimes those record companies would cross a line.
You ever taken any payola? Come on, Randy, fess up.
Only the kind that I could eat. No evidence.
Explain what payola is for those who may not know.
Payola is basically pay to play. That pretty much sums it up. Pay to play.
A man named Alan Freed. Was he on in New York, on a station in New York?
Akron, Cleveland, New York stations, yes.
And he was caught taking pay to play, big money.
Yes. 1959, I believe.
I remember when that story broke and Alan Freed was, I guess, tried and convicted of doing an illegal act, which is taking against the Federal Communications Commission's rules and regulations. He was violating those rules against taking money to play records. I still don't quite understand why it was illegal, but it was.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I'm like you.
In 1959, I remember having to sign. I'd been in radio a very short time, and I remember the form that we had to sign that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, sent out, and we had to affirm that we had never taken or would not take payola, pay to play. We would not be bought by a record company or an artist to play their records. Jimmy Childress, now you know the name. I don't know if you met Jimmy.
I didn't, but a legendary builder and operator of radio stations all around this area.
I worked for Jimmy in Murphy when he put WKRK on the air, and they're still there. A different owner, of course, these days. Jimmy's now deceased, but Silva, Murphy, West Jefferson, Burnsville, Elkin,
Marshall.
Did he put Marshall on there?
Yes, yes.
But anyway, I remember Jimmy Childress that he wrote a letter to the FCC when they started making us declare that we never have taken payola, and he wrote a letter to the FCC that says, hell, we can't even get these record companies to give us the records, much less pay us to play them.
It still goes on. At that time, during the 80s, it would be nothing to have things show up on your front porch, you know.
Well, I mentioned earlier, probably shouldn't have, that I didn't understand why it was illegal. And you think about it, you can see why, because those who had the ability to pay are the only ones who would get their music played on the radio.
thus selling more records and making money. It was a money game. Totally.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, when the federal government came down on Alan Freed, and in the early 60s, Freed's career was destroyed by this the Payola scandal that hit the broadcast industry. When the light was shined on what he was taking and doing, it opened up a can of worms, and every radio station was subjected to scrutiny. And then it kind of evolved. Okay, the record company says we can't just pay you to play this thing anymore, and that kind of slowed down, and it evolved into other ways and things. Well, Payola.
Oh yeah.
Sponsors.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a bit surprised to know that goes on still today.
Well, I've taken some Payola from listeners who wanted me to play a certain song. A lady gave me a fried pie one time. If I'd play her a George Jones record.
That's a done deal, baby. Coming up next, George Jones.
That. I'll be broadcasting at such and such a location tomorrow. You bring that fried pie by, and I'll play George Jones for you.
Yes.
Or a jar of honey, or I've taken a few things like that.
Again, nothing you can't eat. Destroy the evidence. Oh, this business has been so full of many, many, many deals that, some of the most creative business deals in the world that I've ever heard of came from a radio salesman trying to sell some spots on the radio. All kinds of different shenanigans and gimmicks and ways to get people motivated to come into the store and buy the product that you're selling. It's one of the most creative businesses that I've ever heard of. In other businesses, I've talked to business owners, and it's our job as radio salespeople to go to these people in business and help them to generate traffic and build business. And we kind of always had a bunch of those crazy ideas in our back pocket that we'd throw out there whenever the opportunity came along. And some of those were kind of crazy. I've sat on a few Duncan Booth things and fell into some of the nastiest water. I don't know. But and things like I tell you one that I'll never do again. I've done this and I'll never do it again. And one of the main reasons why is because they don't have the circus anymore. The Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus would come into Asheville for a 1 week run at the Civic Center, and they'd roll that big train in down at Lyman Street and start unloading animals, foul-smelling animals, and it was always the policy of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus to have some of the local TV and radio celebrities ride an elephant on the animal walk up to the Civic Center from Lyman Street. One time. And next year when they come back to town and we're looking for somebody, it ain't going to be me. Get that rookie over there. He hadn't ridden an elephant yet. Put him on there. That was a scary moment in my life. I'll never forget it. My elephant's name was Herman. And it was ice. It was putting down ice. We were in an ice storm. And so I'm on top of Herman. And Herman didn't, I don't know, we just didn't get along, and we were covered in ice, and it's one of the worst things I've ever done in this business. Riding a donkey in a softball game. Now that was some kind of an experience.
I've done that. I sure have. All kinds of promotions, and those days are about gone where you'd have these traveling circuses, and there are a few, even the Harlem Globetrotters are not as popular as they used to be. They still travel, But these basketball players today in college are so good that it takes away from the abilities of the Globetrotters to be unique, because the college basketball players and, of course, the NBA, the pro players, they're just so fabulous nowadays.
Yeah.
But the Globetrotters still travel.
And they were always a great show at the Civic Center, brought in lots of people, and the antics of the Globetrotters and the circus and the ice capades and the Sesame Street productions and all of these things that came along through our town.
I used to MC wrestling on Wednesday night at the Asheville City Auditorium.
Yeah.
Every Wednesday night. I was the announcer and the timekeeper for the wrestling matches promoted by Chief Osley Sanook, who was a world champion heavyweight wrestler at one time. And then when he retired from wrestling, he, of course, got elected chief of the reservation in Cherokee, the Qualla Boundary, and he promoted wrestling at the City Auditorium. And somehow I wound up being the MC for a couple of 3 years.
Talking about that, you remember a thing called the Tough Man Contest?
Oh, yeah.
I got rooked into being the MC for that. That was in tuxedos. Mm-hmm. I was the ring announcer for the Tough Man Contest. And from Brevard, North Carolina, from Brevard Electric Company, here's Joe Brown. And Joe would be just, that was that was some kind of rowdy show.
Well, I'll tell you what, these wrestling fans took their sport seriously. And since I was the announcer, and I guess also because I was a timekeeper and, rang the bell when it was the end of a round, they took it out on me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Really?
If their favorite wrestler got beat, I was the one who got booed for some reason when I announced the result.
Right.
Somebody, you remember these little Winston cigarette lighters? They were flat and kind of thin.
Yes.
Remember?
I remember.
Somebody threw one at me one time.
Woo.
Or threw it in the ring, maybe not specifically at me, maybe at one of the wrestlers from the balcony. And it just whizzed right by my head. And I think that's the last show I emceed, the last wrestling show, and it was a show. I remember the wrestlers would come from Charlotte, where they were usually based, and they'd ride up together, and they'd wrestle and turn right around and ride back to Charlotte together. Had one van where all the wrestlers rode in.
Ray Stevens wrote or had a hit song called The Blue Cyclone, and he talked about how he and his buddy got in trouble at the wrestling match. Wrestling and so much more at the Asheville Civic Center that we have both seen in the old Asheville Auditorium. Now, we've about got to go here on our Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan podcast, but the Asheville Auditorium, the City Auditorium, would now be considered the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium. Am I right, Dave? And then the Civic Center, the rest of the Civic Center was built around the...
and adjacent to it. And I emceed the first show at the Civic Center.
Really?
Bob Hope. Bob Hope was the attraction.
Right.
And I emceed that show, the very first show in the Asheville Civic Center, which is now Harrah's.
Correct. And what year was that, 77?
A little earlier than that. I don't remember the exact year, but it was
somewhere along in there.
In that time frame.
Okay.
75, 76, somewhere in that time frame.
Man, we can talk forever, and we're going to. We keep releasing one of these podcasts every other Sunday for you to listen to and go back in time with us on, and we'll be back to do that again real soon. Tell some radio stories here on Hot Mic with Houston and Hogan.
I'm headed for Hogan Holler.
Bye now.
Be sure to click the subscribe button for another episode of Hot Mic with Randy Houston and Dave Hogan.